Sentence structure refers to how the elements of that sentence and the physical nature of a sentence are presented. Just like word choice, writers should strive to vary their sentence structure to create rhythmic prose and keep their reader interested. Before we proceed to the different types of sentence structure, let's recapitulate these following terms: subject, verb, object, and prepositional phrases. So when we say subject, it is a person, animal, place, thing, or concept that does an action. Determine the subject in a sentence by asking the question who or what. For example, I like mango float. Who likes mango float? So, I is the subject. Madeline eats apple. Who eats apple? So, Madeline is the subject. Next, the verb. It expresses what the person, animal, place, thing, or concept does. Determine the verb in a sentence by asking the question, what was the action or what happened? So, for example, I like mango float. So, this verb in the sentence is like. What was the action happened? So, like. And the next, Madeline eats apple. So, obviously, this verb is eats, since it's singular. Now, let's proceed to the object. It is a person, animal, place, thing, or concept that receives the action. Determine the object in a sentence by asking the question, the subject did what, or to whom, or for whom. For example, I like mango float. So, what did he like? Mango float. So, mango float is the object. The next example, Madeline eats apple. So, what did Madeline eat? So, it's an apple. Then, apple there is an object. So, now let's proceed to the prepositional phrase. A phrase that begins with a preposition like in, at, for, behind, until, after, of, or during, and modifies a word in the sentence. A prepositional phrase answers one of many questions. Here are few examples. Where, when, in what way? So, take a look at this example. I like mango float for dessert. So, for dessert is the prepositional phrases. The next example, Madeline eats apple after breakfast. So, obviously, after breakfast is the prepositional phrase. Now, let's take the parts of the sentence structure. First, simple sentence. So, it has one independent clause, contains a subject and a verb, and it may also have an object and modifiers. And it can stand by itself because the idea in that clause is complete. Now that we know the meaning of independent clause, here are some examples of independent clause. I like mango float. Madeline eats apple. Those are considered a simple sentence as well, but don't worry, I'll give more to really understand simple sentence. So, I brush. First example, I brush. Next, Ruel drinks water. And the next, Marie and Anne visited their grandfather at Bareilly. So, the examples above, I, Ruel, Maria, and Anne are the subject who does an action in each sentence. So, the brush, drinks, and visited are the action happened, which is the verb. Water and their grandfather are the object, meaning the person who receives the action at Bareilly. The word at Bareilly is the prepositional phrase since it modifies a word in the sentence. Next, let's proceed to the compound sentence. It has two or more independent clauses joined by a comma, semicolon, and coordinating conjunction, and, but, so, and for. So, for example, I like watermelon and he likes orange. So, after watermelon, there is a comma. So, the independent clause is I like watermelon since it has a complete thought, the subject and the verb. And then next, comma, and the coordinating conjunction and. Then he likes orange. It is an independent clause. Next example, our bicycle broke down, semicolon, we came last. So, there are two independent clauses in this sentence. Our bicycle broke down is an independent clause. The next example is she did not cheat on the test, comma, for it was the right thing to do. So the first independent clause there in the sentence is she did not cheat on the test, comma, for there is a coordinating conjunction. The next independent clause is it was the right thing to do. And the last example, I really need to go to work, comma, but I am too sick to drive. So, the first independent clause is I really need to go to work. And then comma, then but is the coordinating conjunction, of course. And the next independent clause is I am too sick to drive. Next type of sentence structure is complex sentence. It contains at least one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. Dependent clauses can refer to the subject, who, which, the sequence or time, since or while, or the causal element because or if of the independent clause. If a sentence begins with a dependent clause, note the comma after this clause. If, on the other hand, the sentence begins with an independent clause, there is not a comma separating the two clauses. A dependent or subordinate clause contains a subject and a verb or verb phrase, but does not express a complete thought. As a result, it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Dependent clauses can function either as noun clauses, adjective clauses, or adverb clauses. Now, what is a noun clause? So, a noun clause is a dependent clause that acts as a noun. Noun clauses begins with words such as how, that, what, whatever, when, where, whether, which, whichever, who, whoever, whom, whomever, and why. Noun clauses can act as subjects, direct objects, indirect objects, predicate nominatives, or object of a preposition. For example, on the weekdays, I can't do whatever I want. Whatever I want is a noun clause. It contains the subject I and the verb want. The clause acts as a direct object in the sentence. Now, next is adjective clause. It is a type of dependent clause that works to describe a noun in a sentence. All adjective clauses are dependent clauses. A dependent clause is a group of words that consist of a subject and a verb, yet it is not a complete sentence that can stand alone. Adjective clauses begin with a relative pronoun, which connects them to the word they describe, such as that, where, when, who, whom, whose, which, and why. For example, the food that he produces in Cebu is delicious. Notice that the italicized adjective, which is that he produces in Cebu, begins with a relative pronoun from the example above. This connects to the noun being described, which comes directly before the relative pronoun in the sentence. And the next, adverb clauses, also known as adverbial clauses, are dependent clauses that function as adverbs. Since they are dependent clauses, they must have a subordinating conjunction to connect them to the rest of the sentences. Being able to spot a subordinating conjunction will help you recognize an adverb clause. Here are some examples which are grouped by what type of adverb question they answer. So when when the question starts when, so the adverbial phrase, words are after, when, until, soon, before, once, while, as soon as, whenever, by the time. And in how, if, whatever, whether or not, provided, in case, unless, even if, in the event. And why questions, because, as, since, so, in order that, now that, inasmuch as. So where, wherever. So here are the examples of complex sentence. They traveled in Boracay as they were so enjoyed. So the independent clause in the sentence, independent clause is they traveled in Boracay, and as they were so enjoyed is the dependent clause. So in the sentence it has only one independent clause and one dependent clause. So next example, I am beautiful because of my mother's beauty. So I am beautiful is an independent clause because it has a complete thought, and because of my mother's beauty is the dependent clause. So in the example, it has only one independent clause and one dependent clause. Note that there is no comma in these sentences because it begins with an independent clause. So here are the next set of examples of complex sentence. Because he listed the names by alphabet, comma, it was easier for him to locate. Next, in the sentence, because he listed the names by alphabet is the independent clause and followed by comma. Then it was easier for him to locate is the dependent clause. Next example, when the water is boiled, comma, remove it from the heater, period. So the independent clause is when the water is boiled and followed by comma, and then remove it from the heater is the dependent clause. Note that the comma in this sentence, there is a comma in this sentence because it begins with a dependent clause.